So if you read the title, yes, I made a big mistake and it cost us a lot of fish. It's not a clickbait thing. We lost some good fish in the fish room. Let me take you back to how it happened. The other day, I was shooting a video right here. And in that video, in the beginning, I walked from over here to here. The problem was, when I did that, all of these things that you see here would have been in the way, and it would have made for a rather unsightly scene in the video. So what I often do, if I'm shooting something from back here, or I'm shooting something and using the fish room for a backdrop, a lot of times these hoses that you see are distracting, and so I will disconnect them from the upper PVC temporarily. The air is shut off in here anyway, so it really doesn't matter, because if the air was on, you wouldn't be able to hear what I'm saying with all the sponge filters going. So I disconnected all, shut off all the air, disconnected all these things, shot the video, and reconnected all of these air hoses that you see. These air hoses go to some really cool fish, tanks down below, as well as this low boy up here. Low boy is fine. Basically, one of the air hoses, in fact I think it's this one here, actually feeds air to 3 of the 4 tanks down below. Actually there's 5 tanks down below. These are the tanks. So we've got our Tiger Limia tank, and then we have this Caudopunk tank right here, and then just in case anything ever happened, I put Caudopunks in the other tank. They bred, and so we have quite a few fish in these tanks. So what happened? I reconnected the hoses, the air was on. Unfortunately, what I did is on this hose here that feeds the tanks below, as I was pushing the hose back up, my fingers must have hit the valve and pushed that valve up just enough to cut off air to the 3 tanks I just showed you, the Limia and the 2 Caudopunk tanks. Normally, this is something that we would catch in the evening as we're going around feeding the fish. Unfortunately, we didn't. And when I came down the next day, here's what the Caudopunk tanks look like now. In this tank, I have just 7 left. The air was shut off, the sponge filter was not running, and it wasn't running for close to 24 hours. When you're stocking fish this heavily in a breeding tank, that can be disastrous. We have just 7 Caudopunks left. We had about 30 or so in that tank. It does get worse because in the other Caudopunk tank, none of them survived. I have just 1 bristlenose pleco. The rest of the Caudopunks died from a lack of oxygen and most likely an ensuing ammonia spike as the fish started to die. The good news, if there's any good news to this, is the Tiger Limia tank, all of them survived. So we can learn some lessons from this, and this is the whole point of the video, not just to share a bunch of bad news. There are some things we should be doing as fish keepers on a daily basis. There are some things we should be doing as fish keepers on a monthly basis, and I want to share just a few of those things with you to help avoid these types of disasters. Had I done that properly that evening, we wouldn't be here talking about this tonight. All right, so what can we learn from this disaster, from my mistake? There are certain things that we should be checking on a daily basis when it comes to our aquariums, whether you have 1 or you have 100 or anywhere in between. The first thing is make sure your filtration in your tanks is running properly. Now, normally that's something I do twice a day. When I come down and feed in the mornings, before I feed any fish, I'm just kind of looking around the fish room, making sure if I've got hang-on backs, they're running, internal canister filters, a few that we have there, that they're running. Obviously the air system, that no hoses have been disconnected, that no hoses have fallen out of an air valve, that the air valves aren't clogged, that the sponge filters aren't clogged. So I'm checking that stuff in the morning, and then again, when the boys feed in the evening or when I'm feeding, we're checking that again at night. Always make sure your filtration is running. That's one of the quickest ways to have a big time problem, as we did, especially if your tanks are stocked on the heavier side, like these tanks were. The second thing that you should be checking on a daily basis is the temperature of your tank. If you're heating your tank, you should be checking that temperature. Now, for experienced fish keepers, this is a relatively easy thing to do, because I can walk up to a tank and just touch the side of the tank and I will know, okay, this tank is about the right temperature. I can put my finger in the tank and I will know about the approximate temperature. It's funny, when you're around experienced fish keepers, I was just at a fish room, Jason's fish room. I did a fish room tour of that fish room a long time ago, about a year or two ago. And he was keeping some fish at a very warm temperature. And you could just walk up and everybody, they did the same thing, touch the thing, like, wow, that's pretty warm. As you gain experience, that's all you have to do is make sure, okay, yeah, this feels about 78 to 80 degrees. If you're not there yet, yes, use a thermometer. Don't rely on your heater to tell you the temperature of your tank. If you hear nothing else today, don't do that. It's very common for those things to be a few degrees off, and I'll often hear people talk about, oh, this heater is horrible. I set it at 78, it didn't get above 74. I set it at 78, it was 82. Yeah, because those heaters are not necessarily meant to give you the exact temperature. Use a separate thermometer. But anyway, make sure you're checking the temperature of your tank so that it's not getting too warm or getting too cold. The other thing, especially as you get more fish tanks, and this seems kind of like, well, duh, but it actually can be very difficult as you start to add more tanks, is just do a walk around and make sure nothing has died. In our fish room, because we have so many bristlenose plecos and snails, sometimes something will die and you just never know. You're like, oh, I wonder what happened to that fish. Oh my gosh, it's gone. A larger fish, it's pretty obvious, but you don't want to be leaving fish that are deceased in your tank for any longer than they absolutely have to be in there. So as soon as you see that, you want to get those fish out of it. That can cause big time water quality issues. So you're doing a walk around. If you've got a fish room, you're making sure all the fish are doing well. Those things in and of themselves can prevent a lot of problems. It would have prevented problems here. Again, I wouldn't be making this video had I checked the sponge filters on those 3 tanks. Interestingly enough, and I often talk about this as well, we talk about how sometimes Lake Tanganyika fish are not for beginners. They need very stable water parameters. All 3 of the tanks I showed you were heavily stocked. The Tiger Linea, I lost none of those fish in that tank, and yet that sponge filter wasn't running either. But the 2 Lake Tanganyika tanks took an absolute beating, as you can see. So the type of fish that you have, the Lake Tanganyikans are a more advanced type of fish, but that's what happened in our fish room. I hope you learned something from it. Check your temperatures, check your filtration, make sure your fish are doing okay. You should be doing that every single day. Appreciate you being here, and we'll see you in the next one.